I want to welcome you to the December meeting. Tonight's meeting is going to be a public education meeting about the proposed sewer map and plan. Just a very brief summary of the background. Several years ago, the Planning Commission recommended to the village trustees, which was later passed, a rezoning for the village business district. And we did that to both to encourage a more diverse set of uses in the business district, but said that the ability to make those happen was going to be dependent on a sewer district, which we're discussing tonight. We've been very, very mindful of the impact of the drainage from the business district into Lake Agawam as being one of the key issues in the degradation we see in the lakes. So it's been a long-term goal of the village and of the Planning Commission to see if we could solve at least part of the problems in the lake and address the issues of growth in the business district by setting up the sewer map and plan. I think this is either the third or fourth public meeting we've had to present the findings. This was probably the last meeting of the Planning Commission where we'll present the draft. I think our goal would be over the next 6 weeks to move this on to the trustees so they can begin to consider it. So I think I'm introducing Nick, who is going from H2M, who's going to go through the plan. I want to, particularly tonight, given that I think many of you have heard generally about the plan, we're going to go through that fairly quickly and then spend some more time talking about the way it has been proposed the plan will be financed, and a little bit about the what the shape of the initial district is. One thing I would emphasize, as always, the Planning Commission is purely an advisory body. We can recommend to the trustees, but it's really up to the trustees to take whatever action they're going to take. So, Nick, you want
to? All right, good evening. I'm Nick. I work with H2M, as Paul had just introduced me. Some of you may remember me from the last meeting. I presented the map and plan. For those of you that haven't been here, we'll show you what it's all about tonight. So we were retained by the village to put together a plan to sewer an area within the village that was considered an area of critical need due to Lake Agawam. That area is the core business district. But in addition to evaluating the engineering aspects of it, we also were tasked at determining environmental impacts associated with it. So to give you an idea, the project has a lot of different steps in it. And again, this is one of the handouts, the first one in the packets that were on your seats when you got here tonight. The top two rows are the two tasks that were worked on as of this phase of the project. So the top row is the map and plan, which identifies the area as well as plans out how that area will be sewered and funded and paid for. And the lower row is the environmental evaluation process associated with SECRA. So basically, to move forward with the project, I'm going to give you an idea from this point, if it were to be finalized, what the next steps would be. We would have to finalize that map and plan. We have issued the report as of current to the village. Any additional changes would be inserted as addenda. We have to finalize the SECRA evaluation, which is currently underway. Following that, we would have to move to form the district, which is a legal requirement. So legal counsel would be involved. We would apply for grants and funding to pay for the project, prepare engineering design documents, go out to bid, award contracts, construct the infrastructure, and start up and training. So to give you an idea, the current plan considers the entire village as the sewer district, which you can see outlined in purple. Again, this isn't included in the handouts, so if you're looking for it, it isn't. The actual infrastructure would only serve a portion of that area. And I'll give a little more information as to why this was done when we discuss the funding alternatives and the financing aspects of the project. And again, the key goal of this is really to help improve Lake Agawam. As Paul alluded to, sanitary underflow from your septic systems within the village core is only one of the things that is impacting the lake, but by removing that, treating that, putting it back into the ground, it'll help improve the water quality that is currently impaired. So again, as I had introduced, the service area is that core area within the village. I'll get to a more detailed overview to show you specifics about that. But again, the sanitary flow projection for the area is based on county standards, current usage, and it's about 130,000 gallons a day. In order to account for future growth that would be evident based on zoning changes that have been adopted, as well as connections from outside that service area in the future, we have upped that flow to about 200,000 gallons a day, and a detailed analysis associated with how that flow would be distributed both to in-service area growth as well as out-of-district connections is going to be identified and further evaluated in the final SECRA findings. So, as I had indicated, that service area is plagued by shallow groundwater. What the plan currently is proposing is a hybrid collection system consisting of low-pressure sewers, gravity sewers, and the reason this is done is to minimize the depth of installation, mitigate extensive dewatering, and minimize potential overall construction cost. So again, this is your second handout. This is what I was saying. This shows you a boundary and preliminary layout for the collection system proposed for your sewer district. It consists of 44 pump stations, about 17,000 linear feet of low-pressure sewer, about 70 manholes, and 7,100 feet of gravity sewer. The treatment plant part of the project that we're proposing is based on membrane bioreactor technology. It's a limited technology. We're focusing on removing the maximum extent of nutrients possible. That's why we're proposing it. The location that we're proposing it on is on the village police precinct property. Again, this is handout number 3, so if you flip to it, you can see more of what we're talking about. The green parcel shaded in just to the west of the precinct are parcels that are under consideration for recharge of treated effluent. This facility would be designed to match aesthetics of the area. It would be housed inside a building to provide odor control. There would be noise attenuation. It would be designed to current standards so that it wouldn't impact or would minimize the impacts to the surrounding area. As far as the environmental assessment side of things, I'm going to turn it over to Dave from Cameron Engineering.
Hello, my name is David Tepper with Cameron Engineering, and we were tasked with looking at SEQA compliance for the proposed sewer system. And the primary goal of this project is really that it's an environmental project designed to improve the health of Lake Agawam, both the lake itself and the groundwater feeding to the lake. So our initial analysis identified 2 potential areas that will require further analysis. The first being the identification of potentially archaeological sensitive areas. This came through consultation with SHPO, and this will require some relatively minor investigation, digging up soil to relatively low depths in 3 identified locations. The other potential impact that will require further analysis with the village is the potential growth-inducing impacts, which were discussed earlier. As Nick mentioned, the system will be designed to about 200,000 gallons per day capacity, and that's about a 70,000 gallon per day increase over existing. But the important thing, and we're going to work with the village to really nail down this assessment, the important thing to realize is that you can't go all the way to 200,000. You need to build in a buffer, which will reduce potential flow for new development, and as well, as Nick mentioned, out-of-district connections, which will also, many of these connections, they're already developed. It's not new development or new growth. They're simply tying into the system, and that'll essentially limit potential future growth within the benefit area. And lastly, again, as Nick had mentioned, the entire system is designed have very minimal construction impacts. The low-pressure sewers require very minimal trenching, which, very low levels of excavation, and utilizing all the village's existing right-of-ways, parking lots, and roads. It will not interfere with existing private property. So that's a summary of where we are in the environmental right now, and as I said, we'll be working with the village to come up with the specifics of the future growth analysis. Thanks.
So with all infrastructure projects, there's the dollars associated with it. The dollars associated with this project, handout number 4, are broken down into capital cost and operation and maintenance cost. So as you can see, the capital costs are broken down into the different contracts that are typical of infrastructure projects such as this. And the total cost is estimated and opinionated to be $33 million. The operation and maintenance costs are based on usage. So it's based on how much you flow, how much you're pumping into the system, how much you're using of the capacity of the treatment system. There's different components associated with it, labor, administration, they're all listed in this table. And the dollars for this are based on flow as said, so it's $1 per gallon per day. And I believe the dollars for this are $3 and change per gallon per day based on what we're estimating the operation and maintenance for this type of infrastructure to be. So as I alluded to, there are the 2 different components. There's the capital cost component and the O&M component. The capital cost is where you derive your sewer tax from. That's based on property value, which is standard. That's how school taxes are and things of that nature. They're assessed based on the added value of your property. The O&M is considered a sewer rent. And as stated earlier, it's based on your usage. In this case, it's based on your flow. So what we had looked into was how do we break this down? And in the beginning of the presentation, we were saying there's only a small portion of the village that would get the infrastructure. The reason why that was done is because we wanted to focus on a critical area, and the bigger you make it, the more it's going to cost. So you have to try and evaluate an option that makes sense from a cost standpoint. So you have to start somewhere. So our plan was to focus on a critical area and keep it small but big enough so you get a cost and a benefit that makes sense. When we encompass the entire village to consider that as a district, the thought was the entire village is really going to benefit. There is going to be added growth factor. There is going to be possible change of use. So we had to add that in some way. And again, it was done in this case, and it was evaluated, it was discussed, and it is a preliminary plan, but we distributed cost, and it isn't a one-to-one equal distribution, because we know the benefits aren't going to be one-to-one equal. Those that are actually going to have infrastructure, yeah, they're going to get more bang for their buck. Those outside, not so much, but you will get benefit from it. You will get added value when the village changes use in that commercial district. So what we had evaluated was distributing that capital debt service based on a ratio. So 25% of it to those not in the service area, 75% out. And if you can see here, we also assumed grant funding too. These projects, they're meant to benefit the environment, and there is a lot of grant money out there, especially in today's climate. So $10 million isn't an unreasonable assumption at this stage of planning. So as stated, there's the sewer tax and the sewer rent that would get totaled together, and that would be your total annual cost should you be inside or outside. Since you're outside, no flow, there is no sewer rent. So what you can see here, these are just some examples. And again, these are on the last handout of the packet, so you can follow and look. So you can see some assumptions made in terms of assessed valuation of the properties for the examples that are shown, as well as sewer usage or sewer flows that are assumed for properties of that type. So again, these are for people that are inside that red box, the service area. The table below it are for those outside. So those that aren't flowing, but those that will benefit. So this is everyone within the purple box, but outside the red box, if you will. And at the end, that totals the total annual cost associated with this. That's pretty much it. You guys have any questions?
Okay, so, yes, sir. Why don't we start, and I'll add a few.
Okay.
Yes. Please identify yourself.
Susan Stevenson, I live in the village. When you keep saying that the added benefit for people who are outside the district, what does that mean? What added benefit are
Yeah.
you talking about?
So, yeah, so it's
I'm confused.
okay, so, we believe the benefit in the village as a whole is is obviously the improved condition of the lake, which is obviously something that's served by the entire village. The added activity in the village business district, such as restaurants, for example. There are no new restaurants that are possible now because of the hold by the Suffolk County Health Department. And the growth in the village business district will obviously result in a higher tax base for the village. So the attempt here, and it's just really a concept, is to balance the fact that all the taxpayers in the village get some benefit from the sewer district, but everyone obviously acknowledges it's not the same benefit that someone who's in the district gets. So the idea, given and I should say that the way this is being, which I don't think we said actually, the way this is contemplated to be financed is through a bond issue. So you issue bonds based on obviously the assessed value of the village as a whole. There's a very low interest rate on those bonds right now. So really the cost of the individual taxpayer is the cost of the annual debt service for those bonds. And so we looked at the concept of everybody in the village having some share of the debt service, but only the people in the district paying the actual operating and maintenance costs of the plant itself. So who's ever in the district is paying for that because they're obviously getting the use. And then everyone on a whole pays for it, but the payments, as I think we went through, and we could certainly go through in more detail, the payments if you're in the district are substantially higher than the taxpayers as a whole. That's at least the concept. Now, obviously, this is for public comment and debate and everything else, but we thought we need to start somewhere. And I think the other thing is we're trying, in effect, to pass what I would use as a non-technical term, a smell test. Like, how do you say to all the other public authorities who will go for grants that this is something that the village as a whole is making a contribution to? Why don't we come back to you? Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
The 25, 75%, is that common or?
That, no,
That, she asked if the 25-75% is common. And my response to that is, no matter where you are, there is, special considerations made. So to say it's common, it's all different depending how you distribute it and how you're justifying the distribution. But the ad valorem, the assessed value, and paying off a bond, that's pretty standard in terms of determining the tax. That ratio was just determined to say, okay, like Paul had indicated, the smell test, the sniff test, does it make sense? Is it something that potentially could be palatable to those outside? And it was something that we said, you know what, let's see. We think it may be, but depending on feedback, it may not be. So that's why it was presented that way.
Sorry. Yes. Sorry, yes.
Sorry.
And your name, please.
Catherine Daly.
Yeah.
I'm an attorney with Toomey Latham, representing certain people
Great.
in the village. My questions concern the constant referral to growth in the business district.
Right.
And what that is going to do to our current infrastructure, meaning roads,
Sure.
traffic, all of that. And cleaning up Lake Agawam, I think, is a wonderful thing.
Right.
But I'm concerned, my clients are concerned about density. And I noticed, I read the map and plan, which is dated November of 2015. And it says in here that the village would need to either reduce density in the commercial core area or provide sanitary wastewater treatment infrastructure. And it was quickly stated that the village desires to promote growth and doesn't want to reduce density. So I'm concerned about that.
Okay.
I'm also concerned about, I think it was Mr. Tepper mentioned that there's going to be an analysis of potential impacts undertaken prior to the sewer approval, and they're going to be working with the village. I want to know what kind of analysis and what's that going to consist of.
Okay, let me go to the first issue, which is the growth issue, and then
I was
H2M
gonna-
can talk about the analysis.
We'll pass it off to Cameron. They're the
Right.
ones that are working
Right.
on it.
Right, but let me just talk a little bit about growth. So I think it's still on the village's website. If it's not, we'll make sure it is. But there was, when we worked on the master plan for the village business district several years ago, and there's also the design guidelines that were attached to that. What we really looked at was the fact that there is actually a level of density on Nugent Street and Windmill Lane that has gone down, in fact, in the last 30 years. There's certainly vacancies on both streets, as I'm sure you know, and the whole pattern of how those streets were developed is a suburban pattern that I don't think we would really look at in today's world. So the recommendation in that report, and then what was passed ultimately by the trustees, really contemplates that Nugent Street and Windmill Lane would be developed very much like Main Street and Job's Lane had been developed, which is buildings of various size right up against the street. And like Main Street and Job's Lane would have a variety of uses, would include both, would potentially allow restaurant uses, would also allow some residential uses. So historically, the village had actually significantly more residential units in the village business district than it has today. You couldn't do them now without the sewers. It's impossible. So that's what's really contemplated, is the filling in of all that space on Nugent and Windmill Lane that is now down. It's not contemplated that, and if actually, when you read the report, and there's a lot of reasons it wouldn't happen, but it's not contemplated that there's any real change on either Main Street or Job's Lane, that they stay where they are because they're what we all love in the village. So that's really the growth, and the contemplation in the plan was that growth is going to happen, as we've seen in the village, over a very, very long period of time. None of us think it's going to happen in 5 years, 10 years, probably not even 20 years, but over a long period of time, as growth happens, the hope would be that it happens, and so ultimately all the streets look like Main Street and Job's Lane look like today. Having done that, we knew at the time that that could not happen without the sewers, and so I'll let Cameron talk more about it, but the idea is the analysis now will say, okay, we know in the Village Business District Master Plan, we looked at that growth. Now that that growth can happen, let's look at what the impacts of that are. One of the things we did also in the village, in the master plan, is we looked at shared parking, and really making more intense use of the parking lots than we do today, certainly. So that we're not looking at creating more parking structures or anything of that sort. But I don't know if there's anything you want to add. Yeah.
So that, as I mentioned,
Yeah.
So, as I mentioned earlier, the next step in CEQA process is preparing a supplement to the environmental assessment form that was prepared in conjunction with the map and plan. And that is really taking a detailed look at the zoning code, the available flow from the proposed system, and then a full analysis of what potential impacts from that growth would be, which would include traffic, parking, and any other, infrastructure impacts, or it includes anything, the air quality, and it'll be a full CEQA analysis of all those potential impacts based on the level of growth that could be accommodated by the system.
And do you have a time, ETA for that?
That is currently, underway. This is happening concurrently as we're working
Right.
on this.
I would hope in the next month or two it will be out. Obviously in draft form, because it needs to be commented on, as you know, I'm sure, so that it then goes to the next stage. So, yes?
Evelyn Conrad.
Yeah.
Is the commission the lead agency on the CEQA review?
No, again, we are purely an advisory committee, so I believe the trustees are the lead agency.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be the
I have a
village.
question. This review that you're now planning, because I'm a little puzzled by the flow chart. It seems to show a negative declaration, of which this village is right. I mean, a lot of negative declarations. You mean this will really be a full CEQA review of the master plan, or just of this?
This is one particular action. The master plan was already adopted by the village.
It didn't have a CEQA review, and it's mandated by state law that any change in zoning is supposed to have that, particularly since the master plan is in violation of the comprehensive plan that was still in force.
So,
So I'm puzzled.
whatever one's feelings are about the master plan, I understand, but in terms of this analysis right now, this is going to look at in the, as you, I think, pointed out at the last meeting, in the master plan, it was discussed that the zoning would allow certain development to happen, as I said, on both Windmill and New Nugent Streets. That growth, if you will, is what is now being analyzed in the current EAS. And that growth is being made possible by the sewers, but all the impacts, that growth, traffic, noise, air, et cetera, will be looked at in the EIS.
The fact that it didn't exist for the master plan, is that?
Whatever. Yes?
Dee Malm from 91 Hill Street. Just a question on Lake Agawam, because I don't think anybody would not agree that the degradation of Lake Agawam or Shinnecock Bay is very significant.
Right.
I don't know where I read, but I heard you say that the toilets is only one part of why Lake Agawam is the way
Correct.
it is. I have heard and I read that maybe 75 to 80% of Lake Agawam is due to rainwater runoff and not toilets. And so if there's a municipal sewer district based on cleaning up serious environmental contamination based on toilets, will you have or do you have anywhere a flow chart, so to speak, showing where the toilets are that are an issue to our environment? And then the second part
Okay.
of doing a wonderful sewer district and master plan and growth is how much of this is then the anticipated or potentially hoped for growth on Nugent and Windmill, because we're allowing 70,000 out of a 200,000 gallon per day flow in future growth here. The third part of this is, I would hope, just editorial, that would mandate a positive deck, because that's a significant growth for our charming historic village. I'm going out on a limb here. And can we get this information?
Sure.
Okay, so look, I'm Janice Gugino from Cameron Engineering. The flow chart that you were handed out shows two possible paths for the secret process, and every project goes through.
I'm talking about flow from toilets into Agawam, not necessarily the secret flow.
Well, I'm going to answer the secret question that you asked first,
Thank
okay?
you very much.
So in seeker, what you do is you look at the potential for environmental impacts, and there are two routes that you can take. One is you could do the analysis that we're going to propose to do now, where we're going to look at traffic and some of the issues that you've raised. You know, if we have these new apartments, how many school children will there be? All those types of impacts that you would normally look at. And if there aren't significant impacts, you know, that aren't going to be mitigated, then you could do the negative declaration. If there are these significant impacts, then we're going to have to do an EIS. And that's going to be up to the town board. And that decision has not been made yet, can't be made yet, until they look at an EAF and all of the supplements, the analysis that we do. So that is a decision to be made at a later junction by the town board, because they are the lead agency. I'm sorry, the village board, because they are the lead agency.
Yeah, and I just add, it's not, and Frank, please, this is Frank, with information, and please tell me if I'm wrong, but it's not 70,000 gallons of growth. It is, that is actually covering three items. It's covering the needed reserve for the plant. It's covering, which I want to actually mention, because I think we failed to mention it. It's covering the fact that the district might grow in size. You know, things might be added on to the district, so you need some reserve cover for that. And then the third part of that is actually growth within the business district compared to today. Now, I would again remind you, if you look at the business district in 1965 and you look at it today, you would see much more activity on Nugent and Windmill Lane then than you do now. So when we say growth, it's growth compared to where we are today. I personally would tell you, I find it hard to believe there's many people in the village who want Windmill Lane and Nugent Street forever to look like they do today. I find that really hard to believe, but perhaps I'm wrong. So it's all three categories, and the EAF and the EAS will obviously have to show what those all are, and should show what those all are.
I don't want to get hot, but
That's
the
okay.
lines that you put together here, Ben, when we're talking about Windmill and Nugent.
Can you go back to the map?
Massive amount of growth because we're shrinking as a business base, and because they're in a condition where redevelopment might be wonderful for our village. How did you determine, I do have a vested interest in this, if there are properties that are not going to grow at all, they're quite fine the way they are, they might get better but not grow. How did you determine the boundaries of the rent payments versus the
Okay.
entire village?
Right. So what we've done here, and it's a very good,
Associated with toilets in Lake Agawam, is that why?
sewers.
I need an answer.
Okay, so let me try to answer it. So
Thank you.
generally, what we've done here is we followed the lines of the area that was rezoned, generally. And I'm not specific, but it's pretty close to that. So the area that was rezoned as far as the village business district, we used as the base. That area actually is the lowest lying area in the village and does drain directly into the lake currently. So we know it is a problem for the lake right now, and fixing it is going to help. And I think we've been very transparent that the lake has many issues and many things need to be done. But I think the fact that many things to be done is hopefully not an excuse not to do anything. This is one of, and the village has been doing many things over the last few years, as the mayor and the trustees can speak to. We looked at three areas where growth of the district could happen. One obvious area was north on North Sea Road up to County Road 39. Second was Town Hall and the school on Hampton Road. And the third was to expand it west on Hill Street to include properties such as the Village Lab. The decision we made at this point, but it's really up to the trustees, is to start out with the district we have, make that work, and then let it expand. But that was the reason. So there is a nice confluence here of both. It is the area rezoned, and it is this very low-lying area that is draining directly into the lake. And, you know, if you've seen those old, I don't think they're still up, but they used to have photos of the driver's seat of the 1939 storm and Job's Lane and Windmill Lane totally underwater. It is a very low-lying area. Frank, do you want to add anything? Or?
No, actually, I
Okay.
think you said it pretty good.
So this does go through the village latch property?
No, it currently does not.
Oh,
That is one of the areas that could be added.
okay.
But
And
any
can
area
anything be
could be
taken
added.
out of this, or just to say that complete?
Again, we're only, I can't emphasize enough, we're only advisory. This is to forward something for the trustees for them then to decide. Yes.
Hi, Bruce Kaufman, resident of the village. This is going to sound like a flip little cherry-picking comment, but it's not. So, 3 times this summer, I tried to come into the village to have lunch. One time I couldn't get down Hill Street to get in the village in any reasonable period of time. And the other 2 times, I couldn't find a parking space closer than the dog park to the village. I'm not sure I want to encourage more growth in the village from the perspective of more properties, more activities, more restaurants. I just don't see that that's, I wouldn't say a viable situation for the village. It certainly is an attractive one for me as a resident, because I find it almost impossible to use the village during the months from June through August, unless I do it on Thursday afternoon at 4 o'clock. Maybe Wednesday afternoon at 4 o'clock. Thursday it gets really busy. So I've got a question. We're making assumptions that the type of development you're talking about is a positive. I think it's a negative, and I think you'll find there's going to be a good number of residents who don't think it's a positive. What would be the cost of building a system which solved the lake problems? In other words, that basically took care of the problems we have with the lake, purified the lake, but didn't provide growth, which all of us are going to have to pay for, and not everybody wants.
And to do that, treating the lake water itself?
No, I'm talking about putting in a sewer system which deals with the problem, but does not put in excess capacity at excess cost to enable the village to develop further commercial. Half of this, I don't know half of this, but I'll bet if you took a vote around the village, particularly amongst the landowners and taxpayers, you would find that we're finding it almost impossible to use the village during the summer because you just can't get in there. So cut out your equation and say, we're going to put in a sewer system that really deals with the lake problem, which I think we all agree is to our mutual benefit and makes the village more attractive, doesn't provide for much more growth, you don't have any more traffic problems, you don't have problems getting in and out.
Right.
I think there's a fatal flaw to your argument, with all due respect.
It's fine.
All we're talking about is use. You could build a building on Windmill Lane today. You could build a building on Nugent Street today. What you're limited in is what you can do in that building. And so you could build another bank on Windmill Lane. You could build another bank on Nugent Street. You could build another drugstore on Windmill Lane. So what we're talking about, and again, I understand there are obviously a lot of different opinions, and I would caution you that we went through, I think, 2 to 3 years worth of hearings on the Village Center plan, so it wasn't like we did it in the dark in some secret room. But so what we're talking about is allowing growth of different activities, which I would argue, but I don't think it's what tonight is about, are fairly important to the village. More housing in the center of the village, which the village had in the past. And I think as at least some of us age, is a very good idea. And then more places to eat in the village, which will create more nights. I would guarantee you, in the busiest night of the summer, you can find a parking space all over the village. And that's because there's very few restaurants in the village. Maybe not at noon, but at 8 o'clock at night, my guess is you can find a parking space. But again, though, that is what this meeting's about, that's what the trustees' meetings will be about. I think it's going to be very hard to tell a state agency, I've never seen it done, that you would create a sewer district which would only be for the capacity of today and doesn't deal with what could happen over the next 10 to 40 years. It's very hard for me to imagine them approving that.
I'm sorry, you assumed away the alternative.
No, I'm saying if you said, let's just build the 130,000 gallons we use today. Let's say we just did what we use today. But I'm answering that. So that's what you use today. I think it's going to be very hard to tell state agencies that this village, unlike any other village I've ever known, is going to assume nothing will happen in the next 30 years. That's a very hard argument, honestly, to make. If we want grants or the other things that we assume we're going to need to get to make this financially viable. Right.
It is very difficult to assume that.
Right.
Is there a plan which would be incremental? I don't want to pay for growth 30 years from now. I exactly what we need. And a lot of us aren't going to be here. So I'm really trying to figure out if there isn't a more cost-efficient plan to solve today's problem, and then maybe provide incremental growth as it naturally develops, rather than assuming growth in advance and pay for it in advance.
Okay, so we're bound by, for sanitary systems, there are codes, rules, regulations that we are bound to design around. Anything that is going to be protecting the public has to be designed to certain standards. Those standards require us to assign values for each type of use. When you equate growth to a flow, it doesn't work that way. Only because the government, the regulatory agencies, they buffer that number. They're so conservative. Approximately 70% of what is actually happening, of their number, is actually what's happening. So it's not fair to compare it to a flow. And also, you know, to Paul's point, grants are essential. If you were to design for a lower number, that incremental flow, you wouldn't be getting grants. If you were to, just for today's number, and then the cost escalates because the proportion that's being paid by the residents increase. So you actually gain a benefit by achieving grants. It does make sense. No, it is, and I'll explain further. Grants are given out based on environmental benefit. They're not given out based on growth. They're not given out based on improving downtown revitalization. And if they are given out, it's a very, very tiny amount. We're talking trying to get $10 million in grants. That's what this project needs. That's what it assumes. If you don't get $10 million in grants, then you have to revisit the whole thing. But until you start, you have to start somewhere.
Let me actually try to do it in the opposite way, because it may be easier to understand. If you go to an agency, let's say you go to the state agency, DEC, and you ask for a grant, right? Department of Environmental Conservation. The first question they're going to ask is, have you taken into consideration the needs of the village over the next 20, 30 years? And if you haven't, they're going to say, you're not getting a grant. I can't make it more simple than that, because from a planning point of view, now this is really serious stuff, by the way, really serious stuff. From a planning point of view, I've yet to meet the county, state, or federal agency that's going to give you a grant to make sure that you will not have enough capacity 10 years from now. It's not going to happen. So if you take that $33 million cost, which we're assuming about a 3.5% interest rate on, and now you say, we're not going to get that grant, but we're going to make it smaller. So let's say it ends up being $25 million instead. right, instead of 33. But remember, we financed it at 3.5%. So now, 10 years from now, you have to build additional capacity onto the plant. Except at that point, you're now funding 100% of it, and my guess, you know, you'll do your economic analysis, I'll do mine. My guess is we're in a pretty low interest rate environment right now. So if that ends up costing 7%, which it used to, by the way, in my lifetime, that was what public projects cost, 7, 8%. My guess is you've just spent a hell of a lot more money than you would have spent if you did it today at 3.5% and provided efficient capacity, because you're not going to get grants by showing other agencies you've made sure that you cannot cover anything that could happen in the future. And you could say that's wrong, and maybe it is, but it just, the reality of public grants is what they're looking to think of it from their point of view. They have a limited pot of money. They want to make sure that you're not coming back to them in 5 years for another grant. So they're not going to give you the chance to come twice, is their point of view. Yeah, and then let's go on. Yeah, yeah. Right.
But I'm not going to go into it now, but
Right.
I have three contradictory arguments in the last arguments. And one about the basis on which things are done, the percentages, we got to, we pay 5 to 70, I'm sorry, 5 for 100 to get 70. What's the government do? You want the next 30, you go and use it all 5. I don't understand some of the things else. I do understand about the financing costs.
Right.
That I got.
Right.
And I do, but I would think that if I were going to make these arguments, I would really try and put them together in solid numbers, based upon solid projections of growth and utilization.
Yep.
And not just come up with these things that, grants are based upon environmental impact, but they're really not. They're based upon environmental impact plus enough room for growth. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, first of all, I guess I would ask two things. Number one, you read the draft that's now on the Village website. And secondly, we will obviously have to address that in the EAS. Yes.
My question is...
Your name, please. Sorry.
Wade.
Yeah.
My question is, if you really want to preserve Lake Agawam, why isn't one single house going to be hooked up to this sewer system? Not one. So how is that going to help Lake Agawam? Because of the driver's seat? There's a simple solution to the driver's seat. You could spend $50,000 and pump upland their sewage into that parking lot. And I mean, you laugh and you smile all the time, but I'm a licensed installer, and that is a system that these engineers will tell you that is viable. So why are we spending $30 million to clean Lake Agawam when the other day when it's raining, I have a movie, all right, of water coming off the street 2 foot high, running into the lake, filling it in with silt. So show me proof that there's a toilet that's emptying into that Lake Agawam. Show me one. Because the Suffolk County Health Department, as of yesterday, they said there is no groundwater contamination there. And you guys said there is. They said there's not one spot in Southampton Village where there's groundwater contamination. So why are we selling this as something that's going to clean something up when all it's going to do is add density? And the same thing happened in Patchogue a couple of years ago. They said we're going to revitalize Patchogue. And you know what they did? All the residents were there, and they said there's going to be low buildings there, right? They have a 6-story building now with housing in it. And that's exactly what's going to happen here because you have 50% more capacity. And don't say it's not, because it's happened all over Long Island. I'll show you every place they put a sewer was for rehabilitation of a village that was destitute.
Let me
And
just,
we're not destitute.
okay, Michael, let me just talk to your second issue. I'll let Frank address you first. On the second issue, that's the reason we did it in opposite order here. So because you're a very valid concern, which is, and we heard very loud and clear, no one wanted to see 6-story buildings here. No one wanted to see a tremendous amount of density. That's why we did the master plan and put the zoning controls in first. So if you look at the zoning, which I welcome you to do, it permits 2- and 3-story buildings on Nugent and Windmill, which are exactly what we have on Main and Jobs Lane. It doesn't let them happen on the entire street. Just like in Main and Jobs Lane, you have interspersed 1- and 2-, 3-story buildings. So we were concerned about exactly what your second point was. And so we put the zoning controls in first. So when we got to the sewers, those controls would already be there, so we wouldn't see what happened in Patchogue. We are very, but let me let Frank address your other question.
I have to ask you a question. You said yesterday Suffolk County,
I asked him if there was any.
you asked who?
I asked the Suffolk County Health Department.
Do you know who at the county?
Huh?
Do you know who at the county?
Yeah,
Who?
I asked Jim McGuire. He said there is no, that he knows of, any water that's polluted in the village. Do you know of some?
Yes.
Where is
When we did the study for Suffolk County DPW, the study that was privately funded by the county with some input from the village, that demonstrated that, and I don't remember the numbers because it's 2 years now, but that groundwater flow fed that lake. And the other issue, you know, when you talk about show me one toilet, I will. When we set out to draw that line, and we talked about what's affordable and what's not affordable, I remember the mayor, and he said, hold on, let me find out. He made 2 or 3 phone calls, correct me if I'm wrong, and found out that most of the restaurants are paying somewhere on the order of $20,000 to $25,000 a month to pump their cesspools. A year. I'm sorry, a year. So that, you know, if they're pumping, that means that it's not doing, the groundwater is up. That's why they're pumping, because they have to make
You
room for
didn't
it.
answer my question. You said groundwater's flowing into the lake, that's great. But where's the groundwater pollution? You said there was, I didn't hear any. Where is it polluted?
I said that during the study that we did for the county,
Lake Agawam is not groundwater. Where is the groundwater that's polluted?
groundwater feeds the lake.
I understand that, but
Okay.
groundwater, you're not pumping drinking water out of Lake Agawam. I'm talking about the aquifer. Where is it polluted in the village? You just told me it was polluted. There's no pollution. You can't, so you show me where I can't drill
You just
a well.
brought up 2 completely different issues, the
No,
aquifer
you
and the
didn't
lake. Those
answer
are not
my-
the same.
Groundwater is in the aquifer, okay? I don't know if you know that, but that's where the groundwater is. I didn't say Lake Agawam. It's a given that that's polluted, but it's not coming from a toilet, okay? Because if it was, you would hook every house on South Main and Pond Lane onto the sewer system, and you're not. So how are you going to fix it? You're telling me that the driver's seat you keep mentioning. Let the driver's seat fix their cesspool. I mean, why do we have to spend $30 million? And now you just told me something else that I didn't realize. You're telling me now a street, Nugent Street, which is basically 1 story, now we could go to 3 stories. So what do you think's going to be in there?
Mr. White, I really would strongly recommend you go on the website, read the Village Center Master Plan.
I'm commenting on what
And-
you just said.
No, because what you said was not accurate.
Oh, you didn't just say.
Yes, no, let me repeat what I said. It allows 1, 2, and 3-story buildings,
Thank you.
and would not allow 3-story buildings throughout the entire street. So I would just recommend you read the report, and I would also recommend you read the initial report about the groundwater that's, let me start.
You're telling
With all due
us,
respect, can you let me finish, please? I recommend you read the initial reports that were done about both Lake Agawam. There were many reports about Lake Agawam. I think they're on the website. If not, we'll make sure they go on the website. Read the report that was done by the county about the village and about the business district, which is a very low-lying area. The reason why Driver's Seat and other restaurants on Job's Lane have to pump so much is because they're basically right on top of the groundwater. The groundwater is very low there. And again, you may decide after reading all that you're convinced that the sewer will have no impact on the lake, and that's your right. I would just ask that you just read the reports and then come back and tell us what you read in the reports.
my other problem is Bruce basically asked you a very simple question. He said, you know, there's no parking, he can't get there. And he asked you a question, you really didn't answer it, and you just answered it. He's asking you if there's going to be more density.
Well, just-
and you just, yes,
No,
yes,
can
just
I-
say yes.
Again, if you read the study, there was
Just say
a,
yes or no.
Mr. White, there was a
Okay,
study done
it's
of
a
park.
yes.
Seriously, this is not a dialogue, this is a monologue. So can you just please, Can you please allow me to answer? In the Village Center Master Plan, we did a study of parking. What it showed, and obviously people can disagree, but what it showed as a study, there was a study done. It wasn't just someone sitting in a room and deciding something. The study showed that at all times in the village, there are parking spots available if you took all of the village lots. The problem that we have in the village generally at the time of the study, that was I would admit that's 3-4 years ago, was that the parking everybody wants to use tends to get very full. And there are other lots, such as in back of the movie theater, for example, that my guess is even on the day you couldn't find a parking spot in the village, there were parking spots. So what the study talked about and what we tried to do in the plan was talk about how to manage the lots better so that there would be parking spots available throughout the day. So these things were studied, and I certainly apologize if you think that they weren't. And I don't mean to be flip about it. They really were studied, and we spent many years on it. What we're talking about tonight is whether or not the sewer plan makes sense, how we do it, and how it gets financed. But if you want to go back to the Village Center Master Plan and say you think that was an error, that's certainly you're right.
I'm not saying it's an error, but what I think he's saying is in the town center, forget the inventory of the movie theater. Nobody parks there because it's so far away. But take the town center. There's no parking spots, all right? We don't need a study in the summer because you can't park there. So if your main density, where it's going to get denser, is in that area, where will you park? I mean, are you going to build a parking garage?
Again, because I think it's not fair to the rest of the audience, please read through the parking study that was done and the master plan and come back to us and talk about why you think it's an error. But it's not like we didn't look at these issues. We obviously took these issues very seriously. Yes?
Horace Bliss from Village.
Yeah.
Looking at a cost-benefit analysis, I have the perception that the properties in the center of the village, as you described, will have a material increase in fair market value for all the reasons you described. And then I look at the 75%, 25% split, and I'm saying that the group, as you define it, they will bear 25% of the capital cost as you described it, and those outside of that centerpiece will bear 75% of the capital cost.
No, it's the opposite.
It's the opposite.
All right, if I'm an error, tell me, 75% will be paid for by,
The people within the people who are served by the sewer, the other 25% are paid by the remainder of the village. Now, I would just remind, and obviously you know, I'm very aware you know, the village as a whole has a very, very high property value. So if you look at this in the context, and we can go through the numbers with you, of what that 25% is per $1,000 of assessed value, it is extremely low. So we've tried, again, but I'm not saying, I don't think we're here saying 75 to 25% is necessarily right. It's really a place to start and see if the numbers make sense to everybody. But do you want to go through what the numbers actually are?
so 75% capital cost will be paid for by those who get the most
Correct.
benefit.
The infrastructure served properties.
Thank you.
Right, right. And so the amount per $1,000 of assessed value for everybody else is actually very low. Right.
The point, you know, the 75-25, as Paul said, it's a starting point. And we talked about going 85 to 15. You know, what makes sense is not for me to decide. It's for this audience to decide, for this village to decide. But you have to start somewhere.
You mentioned a $10 million
Grant.
grant. Would you subordinate your fee if we don't get the $10 million?
There's no guarantee that I'm going to be hired to do the next job.
Yeah.
All I'm assigned to do is this. That's it.
We see lots of people come in and make promises. They get their fee and they're gone, and we're stuck with $30 million of debt.
Yeah.
I think the idea is the village would not go ahead until the the financing was in place, which would obviously include the grants. That assumption is just based on what other municipalities have received. So it's an assumption that the village would receive somewhere in the same range.
It's a logical assumption based on grants that my firm has been able to get for similar type of projects.
Right, yes.
I must say, I agree completely with Bruce, and talking about growth and future growth. If you walk through the village tonight, you'll find that it's dead as a doornail. We've lost 30%
Yeah.
of our year-round residents. Are you planning to bring them back? Also, we have lost all the mom-and-pop stores. The village restaurants are unaffordable by the year-round residents. You're driving them out. What are you preparing for? The stores that are here, we can get to them in New York. We don't have to have them here. But the wonderful, small, local businesses have been driven out. Now, what are you preparing for, I'd like to know?
Well-
Hilton?
No,
Well, it's troubling. It's very troubling.
no, it shouldn't be
Because the
because,
growth of the last 10 years has been a disaster.
well, there has actually been no growth in the last 10 years
Oh,
from
there
a
has?
physical point of view. There's actually been shrinkage, not growth. So physically, one of the issues in the village right now is actually, again, if you look at it compared to 20 years ago, there's less retail space occupied in the village now than there was. And that's not helpful to your exact issue, which is one of the reasons why we have this, one of the many reasons, and there's many reasons. There's nobody living in the village center anymore. There were several hundred people living in the village center 20, 30 years ago. That was one of the reasons that retail was able to survive in the village center. They don't exist anymore. There's how many people left? 20, something like that? 20? There were probably 300 20, 30 years ago. So that's number one. Number two, there's less and less space. So the competition for the space that's left is severe. When I first moved here, there was active retail there's a tremendous amount of active retail on Windmill Lane. There's virtually none anymore. All of these are issues that the master plan tried to address. And again, one of the other things that is difficult about the village now is in the other 10 months of the year, it's actually very quiet, as you pointed out, and there's very few places to eat. And those are all things that make the village a less attractive place to live. So I think the focus, honestly, of the master plan was not the 8 weeks of the summer, or the 10 weeks, or 11 weeks, or whatever we want to count. The focus of the master plan is what happens in the other 10 months of the year, and how do we create a viable village center in those months. Now, obviously some people are very happy with it being quiet, and I understand that. And that's but that was the focus. So again, but I want to point out that 130, that if we didn't do anything in the village, if none of this growth happens, and none of us can guarantee growth, we can allow it in zoning, but that doesn't mean it will happen. There is a drainage problem, a sewer problem in the village center that we think we have a responsibility to address. Yes, I'm sorry, yes.
Dan Galicio with Conic Baykeeper. It might help if you could, the impairment of the lake is due to stormwater runoff and seepage through septic systems.
Right.
So what percentage of that load will be removed after adjusting for the additional growth by this project? Because that might help to better explain whether or not this $30 million will have a significant benefit on the quality of the water in the lake.
Agreed. We have those numbers. I don't want to start saying numbers right now off the top of my head, but we did. And when we did the study for the county, it was modeled. And it was modeled to show, okay, if these point sources were removed, sent to a treatment facility, the nitrogen was reduced down to this concentration and put back in the ground, what was that overall decrease in flux into the lake? We have those numbers, but...
I understand that.
Yep.
I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I asked the same question at the last meeting, and I got the same answer. And it seems like if the whole purpose of it is to improve the environmental quality of the lake, that would be a number that would be part of your presentation.
I will take your information, I will send it out.
Well, we'll send it to the village, so it can be updated, can be added to the mapping plan as an addendum, and you're right, $1 per pound.
Yes.
Just digging on again, does the $33 million plant not only take care of the cesspools and toilet septic systems, but does it also take care of
No, it doesn't. Sanitary system.
That's the whole point.
Okay, I guess that's it. So how do we take care of the stormwater drainage if that's somewhere between 75 and 80%? Again, I read somewhere, the cause of the degradation of Lake Agawam. Is there something else we should be thinking about now?
Do you want to mention it, or do you want-
Been doing the
Yeah.
drainage.
Yeah.
We put together a bunch of leaching areas by the, on my public house. We installed a lot of leaching field there. Up by the dog park along Hill Street, we put a whole series of pools in there. And all through grant money, there's a couple other things that we're working on right now to try to catch that. Working with the Lake Agawam Homeowners Association. They've encouraged property owners to develop buffer systems around the lake. We've also installed 36 circulators throughout the lake, which has helped improve flow. So those are some of the things that we've done over the last 7-8 years to help improve the water quality at Lake Agawam.
Great, so who needs this?
Well, we all do.
Oh, no, I don't.
We all do.
Thank
Well, this
you.
is, I mean, water quality is an extremely important issue across Long Island, and the quality of our.
Your huge houses might do the trick.
When you talk about extremely dense populated areas, which are the villages and the hamlets, throughout Suffolk County, I mean, I think that there were, when you did the mapping plan, they challenged you with 10 different municipalities, I think it was, to go out and look at. Southampton Village was one of the areas that they felt was important for us to address. And that, the big part about that was all around zoning, to make sure you didn't see the 6-story buildings Mike was talking about, because I've seen what's happened in Patchogue also. So we went through, we spent 5 years doing a master plan update, research, and really doing changes to our zoning to prevent stuff like that from happening. And when you look at Windmill Lane and Nugent Street, you see vacancies in there. And, I mean, everybody will tell you, I get more phone calls about 22 Windmill Lane and the quality of that. And I've gone to the Department of Health myself with multiple property owners and potential property owners to try to improve that property. It's when you have your 2 feet to groundwater, it's awful, and you have to build all these systems above ground. And so it's something we have to address. And also, when you think in terms of, we see the small businesses have stepped away. Why did they step away? And a lot of them have turned over to real estate offices. So in part of our master plan update, the zoning change on Main Street and Jobs Lane, first floor office space is no longer allowed, so they won't be able to convert certificate of occupancies from small retail or restaurant space into office space, which is the real estate occupancies. So if you look at, well, no, because if you look at the old library, why is it sitting vacant? I'll tell you why it's sitting vacant, because there's virtually no one that wants to go into the place. Ideally, that's a perfect setup for a restaurant. They can't get a health department approval to try to do because of flow on the property. So these are things that are hurting our community, and trying to look at affordable housing opportunities. Why do we have traffic problems? Part of the reason why we have traffic problems is because nobody lives in the Village Business District. So all the employees have to come into the Village District, so they're flowing into. So if we go back in the 1970s, we had like 121 apartments above stores. Now we have less than 20. That's what we have. So if you go back to that and you increase the number of affordable housing opportunities for young people to come live and work in our community, then you actually would, in theory, have less people on the road. That's part of it. So.
Use the condos of
How
tomorrow.
come the housing diminished? Because they used it for stores?
They used it for stores. They some of it converted over to office space. Some of it,
Okay,
So there's a whole variety of reasons.
just check.
Yeah.
And also, the health department got a lot tougher.
Right.
So, there's been a
But
tremendous
once
change
it's in place,
in the rules. Sorry?
you can't remove it. I mean,
Right.
if those people had stayed. if
But
there
you
had been
can't, go backwards. So let's
No.
say you had a building,
But I mean,
let's
it
say
was
the
an
example, you had a
opportunity
building.
lost, which I think a lot of people feel There have been lost opportunities in our village. I do feel that.
And I completely agree with
Okay.
you on that. So what we have to do is think in terms of how do we move forward? And that's it. And if you think in terms of, you're talking about the cost of it, if you want to build a plant that's 131,000 gallons per day as to what the, if you say it's 150 instead of a 200,000, what is the cost difference between 150,000 gallons and 200,000 gallons? I'm going to tell you, it's virtually nothing.
That's what I'm asking.
It's virtually
Okay.
nothing, because the only thing is.
That's the question I asked.
Yeah, but the only difference, all the infrastructure's in place. So you still have your 44 pumping stations, your lift stations, your 68 manholes, you have your gravity sewer area. All of those numbers are exactly the same. The only difference is you have a 200,000 gallon plant or a 150,000 gallon plant. Well, it's just the infrastructure cost on
I'm not
that.
arguing with you, I'm
So-
just asking the question.
No, well, it was a good
Put some
question.
numbers on it.
It was a good question, but I don't know the actual cost difference between that 50,000 gallons.
The only thing I'll add is that when you make a tank, because these are tanks, there's an optimal size that equipment fits inside the tank. And what we do is we maximize that volume. And that volume is the same cost. It has to be that big no matter what. So that 200,000 capacity, that difference is minor. The difference from 130 to 200, yes.
Yeah, no, legitimate question.
I've done, my expertise, 30 years of project finance. I've done project after project after project. Every one of them, we had to look at the alternative of incremental growth to meet capacity. All I'm asking is, for the purposes of information for all of us, that the results of that analysis is done so we can make a decision. We have to get to vote on it in public. We can make a decision as to whether it's better, even on a current, on a current phrase now.
Sure.
On the current value basis, whether on a present value basis, which is alternative is better for the village. And we can make all sorts of assumptions like increases in interest rates, we can do a lot of that. All I'm asking is, has that been done? And if so, what does it show?
And a very legitimate comment, so.
That's all I'm asking. I got you, I understand completely what you're saying. I don't want to argue with you. I understand what you're saying.
I have a suggestion that, I know people that live in the Cooper Farm estate area over there and in those apartments, the condos. None of them know about this except one person. And, yeah, well, two people now. The one person I told about it, she said to me, over my dead body, they're going to build a sewage treatment plant next to my condo. And I think it's fair, like this is such a big project that not many people know about it, that there should be an informational mailer and have a referendum, because this affects people's taxes, this affects everything, and that's the only fair way. If you're asking people to spend money, then that should be the way it's done. I mean, it's not for government to say, I know better than you do. I mean, I think it's a democracy. We should vote on this, and if it goes through, it goes through.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. All I can say is, at the planning commission, we're only a planning agency, so
No,
we can't, I can't respond to that. All I can say is, as a planning agency, we have really tried, as I think you've seen. We've had several public meetings, we put an ad in the newspaper, we've had it on the village website. We've been trying every way, we've sent out information through the Southampton Association. We've tried every way we can to make sure as many people know about this as we can, because I certainly agree with you. I think it's better if everyone knows, everyone has input, everyone says the issues they are concerned about. So I hope you feel at least we've been trying to make sure information gets out.
I understand. I mean, I don't agree with everything, but there's pros and cons to doing this. And I think that people should get a direct mailed to them, because they don't, I mean, most people don't even know what's going on in the village, they're just, and it would be fair if people would know and they could vote on it, because I think you'd have a lot more people here if they knew their taxes were going to go up as minimal as they are, and that it could increase density. I think you'd have a lot more people screaming,
Yes?
Will any of the leaching fields be in that right-of-way between White State and Cooper Farm Road? You keep saying the leaching fields.
Yeah, that's where they are.
West
Do you want to pull up the
of the
map?
police station, but there's there's a designated,
It's a little better, easier on the
there's a
handout.
designated parcel there between White Street, Cooper's Farm Road.
Right.
That was given to the village, I believe, at the time permits granted for the condominiums there. Now, that property has been set aside, I don't know under what circumstances, what the restrictions are on using that property. I mean,
I believe when we looked at it, there were no restrictions.
well, then answer the question, are they gonna put the leaching field?
Yes.
in that?
Yeah. It's a, right, you want to explain?
First of all, based on your comment at the last meeting, the mayor did check into that, and there are no restrictions. And leaching pools are allowed. Leaching pools are subsurface.
They're allowed, are they gonna put leaching pools in the right of way between Cooper's
Yes.
and White Street?
Yes.
Yes. You know, the green areas, that's the area.
Any questions? Yes?
A quick question. What will the 44 pumping stations look like? You have them located all over the village. Are these things that people will be aware of? Is there any potential for odor, for noise? Who pays the electricity on them?
That's right, that's right. First of all, the...
That was a question, not a comment.
Yes, to answer the question, the pump stations are about yay big. They're actually oversized residential pump stations. They're prefabricated, very low power consumption. The village would own and operate the pump stations. That cost to operate that pump station, to maintain it, is part of the operation and maintenance costs that we described. That's the sewer rent portion. So the more flow you contribute, theoretically, the more electricity it takes to treat that flow, and therefore you pay proportionately. So I hope that answers your question. Odor, you mentioned odor.
Noise, odor?
Absolutely. Noise, you can stand, if it was right here, you couldn't hear it. And I'm not exaggerating. The cover is solid. You lift it, but it's watertight, airtight. And what we also included was odor control, belts and suspenders. So if there is, we're treating the odor as well. There's 13 miles of this system in Patchogue, and it's proven.
Jay Heesing, a resident of the village. You mentioned that obviously this area is very low-lying. So what happens to the system when it's under 5 feet of water?
Absolutely.
And what's the fail rate? What happens to these systems when they fail? What are the problems that typically can occur? And
Okay.
would like your input on
So
that.
the system is watertight. There's, in the wake of Sandy, restrictions or design guidelines have improved for resiliency. So the people giving out the money expect these systems to be resilient against storm events. That's now written into the regulations that we comply with. So that's question number one. I'm sorry, the second part was? Fail-safe, okay. So redundancy is key. So within each pump station, there's a spare pump. So if the online pump goes down, that's pulled, there's a pump on the shelf, you take it, you put it in, but in the meantime, there's a pump there that's handling the flow. And those pumps are literally on the shelf, ready to be plugged. It's plug and play. They're all looped together for generators. So if you lose power, the generators kick on. They're in sound attenuated enclosures. So I'm not going to say that it's silent, but it's certainly, for the time period that the generator is running, you have to deal with it. But what we found is, and I think you know this, that during a power outage, not many people are producing water. So you're not really treating anything.
But I have read that about 30% of the plants have some form of failure every year. Now, what would that be? What other kinds of problems could exist? Or
Oh,
this
for
is
the plant,
just
okay.
totally fail-safe, nothing ever goes
Okay.
wrong, works beautifully?
Okay, so at the plant, that's the sewer system. At the plant, once again, these regulations we've designed to all have redundant fail-safe systems. They have to be. It's public health that we're talking about. We're protecting the lake. We're discharging to groundwater, which is an aquifer, which is our source of groundwater, potable water. So we are obligated to comply with these regulations. And, without going into, we have redundant motor starters and monitoring systems, alarm systems that go to central stations, and and then there's the operators are trained diligently, and they have to take a test, they have to get a license. There's so many regulations just to prevent exactly what you're saying. I don't know where the 30% number came from.
Yes?
There was a report written by the engineer. Now, why isn't the number, the fellow over there asked the baykeeper about, that's probably the most important number. What percent of water is going into this lake? Shouldn't that be a number that you would know? That seems like it's the most important part of this whole equation of doing this. And it doesn't seem like, I remember the question being asked last time, and it seems like if I was doing this study, that would be like the number in my head.
Yeah, and I apologize.
Is it 10%, 15?
No, it's not a percent, it's a specific, do you happen to know it? Oh, great, thanks.
I want to give these guys a break, so you got a fresh body up here. I'm Mark Wagner from Cameron Engineering. I just did some quick calculations. I don't have the report in my hand. But basically, at 130,000 gallons a day that's in the system, the system would have about 49 pounds a day of nitrogen that's going into the lake. If you went to the maximum, and what we have to do in the environmental part, we have to look at the maximum impact. If we went to 200,000 gallons, with the new technology putting out 4 milligrams per liter, you'd be putting out about less than 7 pounds a day. So you're looking at a reduction, even with the maximum of 200,000, you're looking at a maximum reduction of 42 pounds a day. It's about an 87% reduction. That's a significant load on the nitrogen.
Well, is that the total? That can't be the total going into the whole lake.
No, that's the total from the 130,000 on the on-site systems today.
All right, so how much is going into the
Daily.
whole lake?
What's going into the whole lake?
How can you do an equation without saying the whole lake? And what percent are you cleaning? Is there 1 million pounds? Is there 1,000 pounds? How many pounds go in the lake every day?
I don't have that number.
Because your number really doesn't mean anything because.
Right, let me say this, I hear you very clearly. So we will make sure online, and we'll make sure everyone knows when it's online. There was a study done of Lake Agawam that was actually funded by both the village and the Lake Agawam Homeowners Association. We'll take out that study, we'll take the numbers from it that looked at the various sources, and we'll put it online. I actually think it is online, but we'll make sure that page comes out of the study and is posted in a separate place, so everyone can find it and you'll be able to look at the numbers. I want to make clear, no one has said here today, last month, or 6 months ago, that this alone is going to solve issues of the lake. What the report said, I remember, I think accurately, please tell me if I'm wrong, is there were 4 or 5 different reasons that the lake was in the shape it was, and that each of them are very different. As the mayor said, there's been attempts to address each of them. This is one of many. And so I don't want you to think that anybody here is saying this plan in and of itself is going to solve the problems of the lake. I don't think we've said that, and I hope we haven't, because that would not in any way be accurate.
But the question is, let's say for argument's sake, it's 1,000 pounds of nitrates go in a day, and you're taking out, what was it, 42? You're not even.
Why don't you look at that number and decide?
I'm just trying.
You know, all I can say is, I don't
Can
think
you let me
speculation's helpful.
finish? I mean, I'm
Okay.
trying to make a point. So if it's 1,000 pounds, let's say, okay, and you're taking out 47 or 42, you're less than 5%. So why would you spend $30 million to save 5% of nitrogen? I understand the whole thing of the business district.
Making a wrong assumption. You're assuming 1,000 pounds. The greatest density of nitrogen going into that lake is in this area.
Right.
That's why it's designed.
That was my question. Is there
There's
a
more
report?
There is a report, so again, let me try one more time.
There's more nitrogen coming in that lake from the road than from septic systems.
Mr. White, let me just-
if you have a report that shows any different, I'd love to see it. because
Mr. White,
then
I'll
you
try
can
one
test
more
it.
time. There was a report done on Lake Agawam. I believe, I'll check my machine, I believe it's on the village website as we speak. But if it's not, we'll make sure it is. We'll make sure the page that goes through the various sources gets posted on a separate basis. You'll look at the numbers, we'll look at the numbers, and we'll all talk about it. That's all we can do.
You're making a
If
presentation.
I can make a comment,
Yeah.
though, the purpose of the sewer system is not just to remove nitrogen from Lake Agawam, it's to improve the village. It's
I
to-
understand that
So,
part.
I mean, and that's the major portion, that's only a part of it, and they already told you it's not gonna solve the problem. That's not the only purpose or the sole purpose of the sewer system, it's really to revitalize the village and make it a better place. So that's really what the sewer is all
I
about.
agree with that part.
And if you consider that aspect, that makes it worthwhile right there, without even if it did nothing for Lake Agawam, but it will do something for Lake Agawam as well.
I
know it's obvious, everybody, but that totally contradicts the argument which was made out there. I'm sorry,
What contradicts?
that the most important part of this is basically the improvement of the village. And we've been talking over here that the most important part of this is dealing with Lake Agawam. There are a group here who have said the development of the village is not something that we take lightly. Let's put it that way.
Mr. Bachman, let me
That's
just
all
try
I'm
to
saying.
make a point. I think if, and again, they can replay the tape for you. I think what I said at the beginning was there were two things that we thought would come out of this. Taking a step towards the improvement of the lake, which I believe this will. We'll look at the numbers, you'll take a look at them. And number two, allowing the growth that was talked about, reviewed, debated, discussed, argued, and finally passed in the Village Center Master Plan over many years, making that. Both of those things are what can come out of the sewer system. And if I said something different at the beginning, I apologize, but I don't think I did, honestly. So, yes, one more question, and then, yeah.
You keep cutting me off, but it's kind of disingenuous to come before people here and say that you don't know the two most important numbers. I mean, I'm not saying I like this or I don't like it, but what I'm saying is, how many pounds go into the lake? That should be something up front first. And I don't think it's a good number that's going to justify doing this for the purpose of the lake, because it's so minimal, all right? I've seen that lake filled up with road water every time it rains. And to sit here and say that, well, you know, I bet you it's over 1,000 pounds a day go into that lake. And you're telling me it's 42 pounds that we're going to save, and we're going to spend $30 million. We're better off to pump out the cesspool for the driver's seat for free than spend $30 million.
Mr. White, let me suggest one more time. I heard your point, certainly heard his point. We'll make sure, I think they are actually there, but we'll make sure that online those numbers appear, and you'll come to the next meeting and you'll talk about what you think those numbers show. Okay? Yes?
Well, I know you want to wind this up. Can I tell you one story of a letter frame of mine? Back in the late 80s, I held high office in the village, and maybe it's because my parents were Canadian, but I was a great lover of Canadian geese. And I used to love the sound of them flying over the meadow clouds and going to the fields of Wicked Fog that don't exist anymore, and so on, and the golf courses and so on. And so I said to Dombrowski one day in January, it was so cold, the geese are out there, and I said, why don't we spend some money and buy some corn and feed the poor devils and keep them around because they're so lovely and majestic. And Dombrowski was never at a loss for a smart answer. And he said to me, feed them. He said, there's already 3 foot of goose poop in the bottom of that lake already, you know? And the geese are still there, and I don't know if there's 3 foot of goose poop that isn't going to go away if they're still at it. Anyway, that's a joke. Back to you.
Yeah.
Hi. Since you mentioned that the SEQA review is currently, parallel and underway now, I just wondered, it's a sort of a general question, but have you or will you consider the reasonably anticipated consequences, which is we've noticed extensive development and changes of use, which will result from the installation of a sewer system in your SEQA review? What development do you anticipate from that? I mean, can you address whether or not you're considering that, and what really you anticipate, whether it may not be more peak flow or it may be more people, but certainly you're going to get a lot of conversion to wet uses. I think it's safe to assume. How are you going to regulate that?
We've done a number of studies, and communities that have gone to sewers, the land use, you would be surprised. Obviously, your point is well made that if you don't have sewers and you can't meet Suffolk County Department of Health Services regulations on either 300 gallons a day per acre or 600 gallons a day per acre, you see a preponderance of dry uses, real estate, stores, maybe a gym, because they're limited, they can't have any wet uses. But even those communities that get sewers, it's market driven. So we would be looking at the village of Sag Harbor, which is very similar to you in that it's seasonal. They have sewers. They don't have 200 restaurants. There's a certain you'll see a range. The Village of Babylon, Village of Bayshore, it usually falls out. You see a drop in the dry uses and you see an increase in the wet uses, but it usually limits out market conditions. And we do look at that, and so land uses is very important. It's not because you can build a restaurant, there won't be a whole street of nothing but restaurants. There's usually a percentage that you'll see that fall in. We will compare that to existing communities on Long Island. Some of them have had sewers for 30, 40, 50 years, and you'll see that there's a certain saturation, and then it levels out.
Well, I guess the question would be, and it may be more for the trustees, but how, I mean, we've seen discussions where you really, when someone has a commercial property zone, you couldn't really prevent real estate offices. How are you going to prevent? I think it's a valid.
Well, there's the retail market study, which was done by Robert Gibbs back in March of 2013, which talks about what needs are. When he talks about how the market itself will manage it, I think that's a good basis for them to utilize a SEQA review. I don't know if you've seen that study or not. We'll make sure you get a copy of it. What's that? It is on the website, yeah. So that's part of it. I mean, we actually put into place in our code about first floor office space because we're seeing the conversion of stores to real estate offices. We didn't want to be like some of the other communities. And so is there a way to maybe potentially get in and legislate some of that stuff? Maybe there is. Part of me wants to see how the market manages itself. You'll see deficiencies in what our consumer needs are, our retail needs in the area, based upon that report. So,
Well, not to belabor it here, but I just think, if someone owns a commercial property, many of the commercial property owners, as I'm sure you know, don't live there.
Right.
And their revenue and the value of their property and the rent that they can charge, the potential for a restaurant, a bar, is a lot more than
okay. I don't know if I agree with that, and I'll tell you why. Because I've talked to many of the restaurant operators around here, and when the properties are turned over, the numbers that they turned over, they can't afford the costs. So some of them are turning around and they're looking at, okay, now I'll bring a national chain in of a retail space, and I'll put them in there, which pushes out the mom and pop. So, You know, it's hard to get, it's a free market, it's hard to go in and try to do things about the cost of building. But what we're offering is opportunities to have multi-use within the building. So maybe there's a residential component, it could be upstairs, so now you charge rent, and then potentially there's dry or there's wet uses downstairs. So you're not dependent upon one restaurant carrying a $30,000 or $40,000 a month lease fee, or which happens. We have a few of them around that are paying those kind of numbers. So, it's a concern. Every time I drive up and down, I see empty space around it. It concerns me. Like you, we're all here. We're full time. We're all right. So we're all. I mean, we're all concerned about the betterment of the village. We're all concerned. We don't want to see it completely built out. But we're concerned about traffic and where people are going to park, and this is a component to it, you know. And if there's a way for us to help and allow multi-uses on the properties, to see where is occupancy on a year-round basis, to afford affordable housing opportunities in various places throughout the village, where employees can come, young people can get out of their parents' homes and they can go and get their own place. I mean, those are some of the things that we're looking at, trying to achieve.
But you'll be looking at those consequences.
Correct.
Well, that's
Yes.
Mark's job over there, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. Okay. So just to summarize, we will make sure on the website. I think we'll pull it out as a separate page so that it's easy to find. The analysis in the report on Lake Agawam of what the various causes of the problems were. What else? There was something else we said we would make sure we post. I would encourage everyone to come to the next meeting of the Planning Commission. We'll be considering a recommendation to the trustees, and also to send in any comments, because part of the EAS process is to get comments from the public and make sure the analysis shows up in the report. So please feel free to post comment. January 7th, is that right? January 7th, I was right. January 7th. January 7th. But if for some reason you can't make it, feel free to send us a letter, write us a note, do whatever, so we... Right. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for coming tonight, so I appreciate that.